So everyone, welcome to our afternoon webinar on today's theme, which is homes, buildings and energy. And the webinar this afternoon is So You Want to Get Solar Panels. And again, I'm sure many people on the call have already been at one of our two webinars this morning, but we're here because next week, the UK is bringing world leaders to Glasgow as the host of COP26, which is the UN Climate Change Conference. So world leaders will be making some big decisions about how we tackle the climate emergency and how we reduce our contribution to doing so. But we know that we can't rely on world leaders only to take action on climate change, that there's a lot that's within our power and there's a lot that we can do on a local level to really mitigate the effects of climate change and prepare and adapt for climate change. So that's why we are running this whole week-long program of events and activities this half term to help us all look at what the good things that are happening around the borough are, get inspired and take climate action together. So please do have a look at our program. We have over 50 events happening around the borough today, around the borough this week, not only today. So please have a look there at the program as well. Just a final plug for our climate and ecology strategy, which was launched very recently. And this sets out the route to net zero emissions across the borough. So not only the council's activities, but across the borough, the emissions that come from residents, from visitors, and from organisations. So there's 3 areas that we need to reduce our emissions from. The biggest, the lion's share of those emissions comes from our homes, buildings and our energy use. So you will have heard this morning that that was 75% of emissions across the borough come from our buildings. The second thing that we need to look at is our transport. So moving away from petrol and diesel vehicles towards walking, active travel, public transport and shared electric vehicles. And then there's also carbon emissions that come from all of the things that we buy and use day to day. So these are often carbon emissions that are hidden and we might not notice as much. So please join our webinars tomorrow and Wednesday on travel and things we use, and we'll delve into those in a bit more detail. We also need to protect people and nature by making more space for nature and restoring biodiversity within the borough, and also preparing for some of those changes that we know are already underway and making our people and our communities and our spaces more resilient. So please do have a look at the climate and ecology strategy on our website as well. And so today we're going to hear from colleagues Tim, who is energy lead within the climate unit. He'll be giving an introduction to solar and talking about where to go for help and advice. And then we'll hear from Roy in the planning and economic development team, who will talk about some planning considerations before we go to a Q&A. So I think to begin, I'll now hand over to Tim, who'll give you an introduction to solar energy.
Fantastic. Thank you, Emily. Can you just give me a thumbs up that you can hear me, given our technical challenges just before the meeting? Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. My name is Tim, and I joined the council earlier this year as our lead on clean energy, and I'm going to just talk through some of the kind of considerations for domestic scale, so kind of looking really at houses and flats, residential scale solar energy, which is really, I mean, Emily was talking just now about the need to decarbonise our buildings and our energy use, and I think this domestic scale solar energy is one of the best renewable energy opportunities that we have in our borough in Hammersmith and Fulham. So it's definitely something that could be of interest to quite a few people. And then I will hand over to my colleague Roy, who will talk a little bit about some of the planning considerations for solar energy as well. Next slide, please, Emily. So when people talk about solar energy, what they usually mean, there's kind of 2 main types of solar energy, but what they usually mean is solar PV or solar photovoltaics, which basically means making electricity from light. Photo is refers to light and voltaics refers to electricity. So this is kind of 90% of the time when people talk about solar energy, this is really what they're talking about. And these are kind of many different types of these panels, but these are basically panels that convert solar energy preferably direct solar energy, but they can also do it when it's cloudy. So it doesn't have to be kind of direct sun to electrical energy. They're usually more often than not they're installed on pitched roofs, so sloping roofs that face somewhere between southeast and southwest. And at our latitude, we're at quite a high latitude in London. Most of the solar energy most of the year comes from kind of between those two directions. You can install them on other roof pitches and they will work, but they won't work so well. They won't pay back so quickly, and they won't generate so much electricity. As far as costs go, the costs of solar PV, of solar energy in general, have come down quite significantly over the past kind of 10 years or so. And although there are kind of wiggles in this downwards trend, and there's a bit of an upwards wiggle at the moment due to kind of supply chain disruption that's caused by COVID and Brexit and various other factors affecting quite a lot of things, not just solar energy, but overall, the costs are on a downward trend. There's still quite a wide range of costs if you're thinking of looking at solar PV, but that kind of 5K to 10K range gives you an idea. It will vary depending on the type of panel, whether you include some optional extras, which I'll kind of come to in a second, and of course the size of your house and the number of panels you want, but that kind of gives a rough idea. The picture I've chosen on this slide actually is something quite new. It's probably kind of, I've not really seen any of these around yet, but it's something that's just kind of coming out now, which is solar roof tiles as opposed to solar panels. So these will cost quite a bit more, probably minimum 20K. But they do look better than solar panels, and I think they are worth considering on a south-facing or south-ish facing roof aspect if you are replacing your roof anyway. But if you're not replacing your roof anyway, they're almost certainly not going to be cost-effective because of the higher cost of them. Next slide, please, Emily. So just a few. This is not going to be comprehensive by any means. I will kind of give you a few links to sources of further information and do my best to answer any questions at the end. But just a few kind of initial considerations if you're thinking about installing solar PV. Probably the most important one is where would you put it? And that normally means on a roof. You can install solar PV on the ground, but it needs to be quite exposed to the sun. It needs to be not significantly shaded during daylight hours, and that's quite difficult in a dense inner urban borough like ours. So I would expect most PV installations in our borough to be on rooftops. So ideally, if you've got a pitched roof, you want a roof that faces somewhere around kind of southeast to southwest, although you can use other angles. You can also install solar PV on flat roofs as well. So you can have panels that you can angle towards the sun that you can then put on a flat roof. So they can be a very good option for blocks of flats as well. And often the flat roof on top of a block of flats, because it's quite high up, it's not overshadowed by trees and other buildings. So it actually gets quite a lot of sun. The second point there, this is quite important to how quickly a solar PV installation will pay back, is how much electricity do you consume, and crucially, when do you consume it? The best option for electricity you generate using solar PV is to use that electricity then and there as you generate it. But obviously, in order to do that, you need to have some kind of system or appliance in your house that needs to run during daylight hours, or the house needs to be occupied or the flat needs to be occupied during daylight hours. I put great with a heat pump, and solar PV is great with a heat pump. I'll say a bit more about heat pumps in just a second, but basically heat pumps are a way of heating your house using pumping in heat from outside your house or your flat to inside your house or flat, and they run on electricity. So if you've got a heat pump, that's going to be something that's likely to be using electricity at least some of the time, quite a bit of the time, in fact, because you need to leave them on quite a lot during daylight hours. So that kind of matches very well with your solar panels and is a good way of really efficiently using that zero carbon electricity to generate zero carbon heat. If you can't use the electricity, I mean, a lot of householders won't be able to use the electricity straight away. My next point there, to battery or not to battery, then probably the best way of dealing with that is then to install a battery system with your solar PV panels, and you can use that battery to store the electricity until such time as you need to use it later that evening or on a different day or whatever that may be. The only consideration there, of course, is that obviously a battery will add to the cost of your system. The kind of battery you will need with a solar PV system might cost a couple of £1,000s. So that's why it's the kind of optimum solution is to use it then and there. But a lot of systems do have batteries included. And then kind of the third best option of what to do with the electricity is to export it to the national grid. So that's if you can't store it and you can't use it then and there is something called the smart export guarantee. That means that you are guaranteed to be able to sell the electricity you generate to the national grid, but you won't get anything like as much payment for that electricity as it would have cost you to have bought the same amount of electricity in the first place. So for that reason, that's kind of the third best thing to do with the electricity you generate. The next point down, type of solar PV panel. I'm not kind of a technical expert on this, but just suffice it to say that there are quite a few different types of solar photovoltaic panel out there on the market. I don't think there's any bad options, but it's just worth being aware of what you're getting. So for instance, there's a type called monocrystalline panels, which are generally reckoned to be the best. They're best because they're generally a bit more efficient. They generate a bit more electricity for every watt of sunshine that they receive. But on the other hand, they cost a bit more. So, there's kind of swings and roundabouts. I don't think there's any bad options, but I think as an informed consumer, if you're looking at solar PV, it's always worth asking your installer exactly kind of what are you giving me, what type of solar panel is this going to be. Maintenance is not it's not a huge issue with solar PV, but they definitely a solar PV system should last at least 25 years. And I mean that picture on the right there is kind of more typically what solar panels look like if they're not solar roof tiles, like I showed you on the previous slide. They will need cleaning at least once a year to remain at optimum efficiency. There might be kind of a couple of subcomponents such as inverters that convert direct current from the panels to alternating current that your house will use that might need replacing before that 25 years. And if you have a battery, it's unlikely your battery will be at peak performance for 25 years, so you might need to replace that before the 25 years is up as well. So just kind of worth factoring some of these maintenance issues in if you are thinking of solar PV. And then the final point, planning permission. I'm not going to say anything about that because Roy will do it very much better than me in a moment. Next slide, please, Emily. Conscious I'm running out of time a little bit. So the other type, and I'll be much briefer on this, of solar energy. So solar PV is normally what people mean, but there is also something called solar thermal panels as well. And these only produces heat because, of course, you can use electricity for pretty much anything. You can use electricity to generate heat, but you can also use it to power your fridge or your television or your smartphone. So solar thermal is intrinsically less versatile, but because it will only produce heat. People usually use it to produce hot water, which is why I put needs hot water tank with solar heating coil. You can actually use solar thermal to provide space heating in your house or flat as well, but you need a thermal store in order to do that at additional cost. So people usually use it to produce the hot water. A solar thermal system, again, if kind of correctly sited on a roughly south-facing roof, or you can put them on a south-facing wall as well because they're smaller, which is one of their advantages, ought to produce about half of your hot water over the course of the year, ranging from all of it over the summer to kind of a portion of it, but less than half of it in the winter. They're also cheaper in general. Their kind of typical installation cost might be about £4,000. As I say, they're smaller. So there are, although they only produce heat rather than kind of a much more versatile form of energy in the form of electricity, they can be a better option in certain instances if you've got less space, for instance. And they can be quite a good option if you live in a multi-person household that uses quite a bit of hot water. Again, if you live in a kind of single-person household that doesn't use so much hot water, they might not be such a good option. Again, the fourth point there, just like with solar PV, there are different types of solar thermal panel, and the one you really want in the UK is what people call evacuated tube. This is the one I've got pictured there on the right of the slide. Kind of looks like a load of kind of dark tubes arrayed on the panel, and that's just more efficient in a cooler climate like the UK. You can also get flat panel, solar thermal panels, but you don't very often see them in this country because they don't work terribly well in the UK. And then the final point is it's just worth flagging as well. Whilst feed-in tariffs for solar PV have stopped now because the technology is cost effective without it, you can still get a government incentive in the form of something called the renewable heat incentive for installing a solar thermal panel. It's not a huge amount of money, but it might, for a typical installation, might be £150 a year or £200 a year over the course of about 7 years. So it's worth just bearing that in mind as well. Next slide, please, Emily. And I just wanted to kind of put this in because I think it's solar energy is a really good option, but don't forget the rest of your house or the rest of your flat. And people often talk about fabric first, and this particularly applies to insulating your roof. If you've got a badly insulated roof or an uninsulated roof, it's almost certainly more cost effective for you. You'll save more money overall by insulating that before you kind of go on to other things like heat pumps and solar energy. So it's just kind of worth bearing in mind. People talk about kind of whole house retrofit, but thinking about your house or your flat in its entirety and think about, well, what are the most effective things I can do to save money and to save carbon emissions and to help the climate. And it might not be that solar energy is the most effective way you can spend your money. There might actually be more effective ways to spend your money. Lighting is another good one. We should already be using LED lighting now. We should all be making sure that we don't leave appliances and lights on when we're not using them. That's super important, but very basic. Plug load, I mentioned that this morning. I just mean things you plug into the walls, so things like your appliances. If you do have any outside space, it makes a big difference to make a bit of space for biodiversity. So even if you have got, a paved over front garden to park your car on, if you can just kind of carve out a bit of space by the side for some flowering plants or a hedge or something, that makes a huge difference to wildlife. And then final point, could you install a heat pump? And this is kind of this is the way that heating is going in the UK, and I think we will all be using heat pumps in kind of 20 years time, 15 years time. We're all going to be switching over to heat pumps, which are basically a way of kind of using electricity to pump in free heat from outside your house to the inside of your house. And the government is kind of keen to accelerate this and has just announced new grants in the form of something called the Boiler Upgrade Scheme, which will be grants of up to £5,000 per household to install heat pumps. That's not running yet. That'll be running from April 2022, and I don't have very much more detail on it yet. It's still being worked out, but definitely something to remember and bear in mind. Next slide, please, Emily. So next slide again. I just wanted to very quickly, I've already been waffling on probably for too long, and I can't cover everything that you need to know about solar energy. So we will circulate these slides afterwards. I've just put in a few links there of kind of not-for-profit independent organizations that will offer more information and advice on solar energy. The Energy Saving Trust is very good. That second one down there, they've got a calculator that will give you an idea, just a rough idea of what it might cost you and what it might save. The GLA has some good resources as well. The second one down, the London Solar Opportunity Map, kind of shows you what your solar energy potential is on a building by building level in London. Again, it's very high level, but it's very good for giving an initial idea. And NEA is National Energy Action, which is a kind of a charity that again gives some very good impartial advice on not just solar energy, but kind of wider energy efficiency and keeping your home warm and saving money as well. So I'm now going to, that's everything I wanted to kind of quickly say about. I'm just going to hand over to Roy now, who is works in our planning department, who's going to just run through a few of the considerations around planning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. So my name is Roy Hagner-Power. I work in the town planning department, where one of the team leaders. I'm just going to take you through some of the planning considerations. So next slide, please. Thank you, Emily. So question, which is the basic one which I've been asked to address, is do I need planning permission for solar panels? And on to the next slide, please. Emily, thank you. So for all intents and purposes, most domestic properties do not require planning permission. But of course, there are always some exceptions. So on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So this slide essentially addresses where the exceptions are. And if you have a property, which is a house, which might be a typical example in this image on the right, if the solar panels exceed the highest part of the roof, excluding the chimney, then it would need planning permission for that criteria. If the solar panels project more than 200 millimeters from the surface of the roof or from the surface of a wall, then it would need planning permission. If the wall on which the solar panels are attached front a highway and it's in a conservation area, then it would need planning permission. If the property is a listed building, and there are several of these in the borough, it would need planning permission. And also, if what we call Article 4 direction has been imposed upon certain properties, and effectively removes permitted development rights, so forces you then to have to seek planning permission, then an application would be required. Now, there are some other considerations as well. So just go on to the next slide, please, Emily. So as far as practicable, essentially we want to try and make sure that solar panels are sited to minimise the effect on the external appearance of the building and the character of an area. And where they're no longer needed, they should be removed as per the image below, which is not in the borough, I should say. And then that's fine for when you're looking at, you know, permitted developments, but when permission is actually required, then we have to use the local plan as a guide, and the local plan includes a series of policies which guide development, and in short, it's basically trying to make sure that any development respects existing buildings. And where you're looking at new development, normally some things like solar panels will be taken into account. Where you're looking at existing buildings, we have policies obviously that look at alterations and extensions, and that's where we would apply the local plan policies where they're relevant. And just for your sort of reference, there are 44 conservation areas in the borough. There are some 500 listed buildings in the borough. And there are about 46 areas which include Article 4s. And in each of those scenarios, you would need to submit a planning application, and we would then consider each application on its planning merits. In addition to sort of some of the images I showed, I've showed ones which relate to the attachment of solar panels to roof areas, but there are also permitted development rights for freestanding solar panels, which Tim alluded to earlier, which I think essentially we probably don't have that many locations in the borough where they could be located if you're looking at residential properties. But in short, there's some separate guidance for that, which I can provide, you know, outside this meeting. And then we also have some guidance on air source heat pumps as well. But next slide, please, Emily. So I've tried to keep it simple because the planning is not very straightforward, and so trying to keep the kind of key areas narrow. So on our website, we have a frequently asked questions page, which you can literally tap into and see, search some of these queries and get some answers to. That's self-help. We also have a link which identifies where our Article 4 areas are in the borough. And again, there's a link to that, and it identifies particular streets. And in those particular streets, some properties, for example, may have had, you know, rights to remove any sort of alterations at roof level, and that means an application is required. And if you find all that confusing, we do offer free advice, and you can contact directly on the number which is shown on the screen. And we would sort of generally encourage, if you do want to contact us, is to do it by email, because that comes directly through to us, looking at the link on the page. So if you've got any questions, then no doubt Emily will host the next session. Thank you very much, Emily.
That's great. Thank you very much, Roy, and thanks, Tim. So we've now got some time for Q&A. So if people would like to ask questions, please do pop those in the chat, and then we can field them out to Tim and Roy. And if we don't have the right people on the call to answer, or we need more time to follow up, then we'll note them there and get back to you on those questions as well.
Thanks for that, everyone. So finally, just before we wrap up, what is on today? If you have a look at the programme, which is on lbhf.gov.uk/climate-carnival, you can have a look at some of the events that are happening today. We've usually got a couple of webinars in the afternoon and lots of events happening out and about all over the borough. So please do have a look. We've got over 50 things happening this week. So please do check out the programme and get involved if you have time later today. And finally, just before we wrap up, please do sign up to our newsletter. So this is a monthly newsletter all about climate action taking place across the borough. We talk about what we're doing as a council, things that are happening in the community, things you can get involved in, as well as what we're reading and sharing. So if you head to the climate pages on our website, you can sign up for Climate Connects. And finally, that's us for this morning. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming along, to all of our speakers for presenting, and for everyone's questions and comments. That's our generic email address there that comes through to me. So look forward to speaking with you there, and our web address as well. Thanks, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the week.